In today's video, we're taking a look at the latest trade and free agent rumors regarding the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, there's been lots of talk about Mitch Marner being traded. One NHL longtime analyst feels that he's not the guy that should be moved, and it should be Morgan Reilly. We'll discuss how that could work and what his thought process is behind that. Plus, we're also going to take a look at some of their top UFA targets that they might be interested in signing should they be available on July 1. We'll take a look at that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're taking a look at the latest trade and free agent rumors around the Toronto Maple Leafs, since they seem to be getting a lot of the attention right now. Certainly some big high-profile players that might be on the move. It's generating a lot of buzz, of course. We've heard lots about Mitch Marner being a trade piece and being on the move this offseason, and that very well could happen. But I heard a very interesting take from a longtime NHL analyst and reporter, John Shannon. Of course, John Shannon's worked for a long time with Sportsnet, does a podcast with Bob McCown. Well-connected guy, and certainly has lots of his own opinions. Been a lifer around the game, so very knowledgeable too. Now, his take that I've heard him talking about here in a recent radio hit was that Mitch Marner is not the player out of the core that they should be looking to move. He felt that the offense that they have in Toronto might be good enough to win, but their defense is not good enough to win. So he suggested trading Morgan Reilly instead of Mitch Marner. Obviously, it's an interesting take. Now, of course, I know a lot of Leaf fans really like Morgan Reilly. He's a very popular player. For the most part, not really viewed as being part of the problem or part of what needs to change, so to speak. I mean, we saw Morgan Reilly this past year, during the later part of the season when there was a game against the Senators, when Ridley Gregg took the slap shot into the open net. Yeah, did he cross the line? Reilly reacted, cross-checked Gregg to the head, took a 5-game suspension. But it was that pushback. It was that the way he reacted, the attitude, as much as he didn't really like the outcome, and maybe he could have, cross-checked him in a different part of his body. Maybe he could have avoided that suspension. But he just liked the idea. I think as a Leaf fan, it was nice to see for some, that at least a lot of Leaf fans agreed, that it was just nice to see that fight and that pushback. Was unfortunately in Toronto, a lot of that has been missing. A lot of their top stars, they're not paid to fight. I'm not suggesting Austin Matthews or Marner or Willie Nylander need to start dropping the gloves or anything of that nature, but they typically shy away from the rough stuff. They don't play a physical style of game at all, and it's just, you don't really see that. And in the playoffs, when things get really rough, you just quite often don't even see them taking their game to that level, which is, I think, for some people, part of the reason why they haven't had more success in the playoffs. Just that attitude of anything to win. You see, like in the case of the Oilers lately, Draisaitl, McDavid, even blocking shots. You just, haven't seen that same approach from the Leafs. I think a lot of people appreciated it. Like I said, a lot of people didn't like the suspension. It sucked to lose them for 5 games, but they did well without him. It was just nice to see. So a lot of people kind of view Reilly too as being the unofficial captain. He's been there the longest of all these guys. He's not much older, but a bit older than Nylander and Matthews and Marner. And a lot of people see him as being a better leader than John Tavares. And that's just the way it is. So trading Reilly to me would be an odd approach. I wouldn't completely rule it out, and I don't completely disagree with John Shannon's analysis here that their offense might be good enough to win, but their defense isn't. But Reilly's been the best part of that defense for an extended period of time. Now, you look at how they constructed their blue line this year. I think they might have had a little too much on the gritty side and not enough on the puck-moving side. Like, they brought in Lyubushkin. They got Jake McCabe. There's just too much of the same. Simon Benoit, again, like, these guys can all play the physical style. Like, they can battle in front of the net, but, skating, moving the puck, not exactly their strong suit. So you have to have a balance of that. So it's like they almost loaded up too much on the grit and not as much on the puck moving. And outside of Reilly, you just don't have a lot of skill back there that can do that. So I know the consensus with a lot of people is like, if you do trade a guy like Marner, you have to get pieces coming back to bring you another top pair defenseman. And I've been screaming for years that Morgan Reilly needs help. I don't really view Morgan Reilly to be honest, as being a really bona fide number one. I think he'd be a really good number two. If he had a top pair right shot defenseman to play with him and took the pressure off him and he could kind of be the second best, I think that would be a lot better for him and better suited. I think really, like, at the end of the day, that's, I think, where they need to go. I mean, if they, like there was one talk the other day, we talked about Marner going to Vegas for, like, Pietrangelo. Okay, well, Pietrangelo would be that stud right shot number one defenseman. That takes a lot of the pressure off of Reilly. To me, suddenly their D-core gets a lot better. They add size, they add experience, they add a good skater, good puck mover, good offense, good two-way defenseman. But at the same time, like, moving Reilly, you're going to get worse before you get better. Can you move Reilly for another defenseman that might be as good or better? Maybe, depending on the package. I'm not sure, like, looking around the league, what that deal would be. But at the same time, it's going to be awfully challenging to find it. So, in all honesty, like, if you look at how some of the more recent Cup winners or Cup finalists have been constructed, you don't always need elite level goaltending. Like, to me, the Lightning in the more recent years have been the exception with that, with Vasilevsky. But like Colorado won with Darcy Kuemper, Vegas won with Aiden Hill. Even when Washington won originally, they started with Grubauer, who got taken back over by Holtby, and he had a good run there. But, Holtby wasn't, I don't know if a lot of people consider Holtby to be elite, but, at the same time, like, goaltending is a factor, there's no doubt. But it's not everything. It can be done without it. Look at the Edmonton Oilers. They're one win away, as I record this video, from going to the Stanley Cup final with Stuart Skinner. I don't think anybody would call Stuart Skinner elite. He can be good enough. And when they play the game in front of him, the way they've been playing it with a strong defensive style and blocking shots and, strong puck possession game, then he doesn't have to be awesome for them to win. So, I mean, every team is built differently, but a lot of the teams that are getting through, like, you don't always need that. So I'm not convinced they need to necessarily go out and get an all-star goaltender. I think they need to have more than adequate goaltending, which we'll talk about here shortly. But they do need, usually you have like I would say 2 stud defensemen and at least 2 elite forwards. Like, and by elite, we're talking like, top 20 guys in the league, legit bona fide number one on any team kind of player. So you're looking at, like, look at the Panthers 2 years in a row going to the finals. They've got Barkov and Tkachuk. You could throw Reinhart and Verhaeghe in there. They got more than 2. On the back end, Forsling has become that strong D, and you got Montour and Ekblad. Like, they've got really good defensemen back there too that can fall into that category. Look at the Avalanche, McKinnon, Rantanen, Taves, Makar. That's just the way some of these teams have been built. Look at Vegas when they won. Like, you got Mark Stone, Jack Eichel, Marchessault was kind of in that category, and then you got, like, Pietrangelo, Theodore, and average goaltending. So, in all honesty, the Leafs have 4 forwards that kind of fall into that category. Tavares is kind of at that point where I don't know, I'd call him really good, not necessarily elite, but the other 3 fall into that category. But they don't have the D to get there. Reilly, like I said, to me, he's really good, but I don't know if I'd call him elite. So you need, if he's your number 2, you're that much better. So I really do think that, to me, from a roster construction standpoint, it makes more sense here to move a forward for a strong D and maybe more. You might be able to get more pieces in that package. So I just want to get everybody's thoughts here on John Shannon's analysis that Reilly's the guy that should go. He's been there the longest. The D is not good enough. And I'm not obviously here to pick on John Shannon, but I just thought it was an interesting take, and of all the talks around what the Leafs should do and all the moves they should make, that he's the only one I've really heard pushing for a Reilly trade, whereas everybody seems to be pushing on that. Between Marner, the other fact here is Marner's contract has got 1 year left on it, and he's going to be looking for a long-term deal with more money. So from a cap perspective, that's going to be really challenging for the Leafs to do, whereas Reilly's already signed long-term at a pretty fair value contract. So, you can have Morgan Reilly pretty much the rest of his career if you wish, because that's likely the way he signed. That's going to take him there. And the value isn't isn't too bad. Now, at some point, that could change if his game falls off or whatnot, but you don't have to wonder and question what his next contract's going to be, what his value is going to be, how he fits into their cap structure, or anything like that. So, to me, I honestly don't think that trading Reilly is better than Marner. But I do want to know what everybody else thinks out there. Do you think that there's a better trade options, or do you think that John Shannon's onto something here, or am I crazy that this is completely the wrong way about changing the construction for the Leafs? Now, looking at some of the UFA targets, there's some rumblings around the league. Of course, we know that they're interested in bringing back Bertuzzi and Domi, and that could happen, but of course they may not bring back both. And a lot of what they do here between Domi, Bertuzzi, or any external free agents is going to depend on what they do in the trade market, because they don't have a lot of cap space and they need to be frugal with what they can hand out here. So if they move a guy like Marner, it depends on what they bring back. How much space can they create? Because obviously getting Domi and Bertuzzi both signed might be challenging. They might only be able to keep one. But they both found their roles as the season went on. And if they can find a way to keep both, then I think the team really should continue pushing to do that. But a couple of the external names they're looking at, one in between the pipes, like I said, there's teams out there that have proven you don't need elite goaltending. You need a little bit above average. And Laurent Brossoit of the Winnipeg Jets is a pending unrestricted free agent. And I've seen some reports out of Toronto media that he will be a target for the Leafs come July 1, assuming that he hits it there and is not signed by the Winnipeg Jets. Now, the Jets also have Connor Hellebuyck. Hellebuyck has worked with Brossoit on a couple occasions. Brossoit started his career earlier in his career, he was with Winnipeg. He had a good stretch there with the Edmonton Oilers. Ended up in Winnipeg. His time in Edmonton wasn't the greatest. Edmonton was a different team at that point too, so hard to really fairly compare how he's evolved. But had a run in Winnipeg, ended up in Vegas for a couple of years, and then back to Winnipeg last year. And really, towards the end of his time in Winnipeg and then into Vegas, he kind of became one of the better backups. And if you look at the last 2 years, he's got a .927 save percentage 2 consecutive years. That is well above average. Really, really good. Obviously he's got 140 games now of experience under his on his resume. He's 31 years old, so very mature. Seems like he's kind of in that peak prime part of his career. Goaltenders tend to hit their prime at different stages than some of the skaters do. I think goalies, like, sometimes it's 26, 27 to 32, 33. If they can get Brossoit on a 2-3 year deal to work with Joseph Woll, and he's not going to cost a ton of money, they might be able to get a goalie like him for, I don't know, $2.5-3 million. I'm not really sure what it's going to cost, but I mean, he's probably going to be looking for more of a starting role or like a 1A, 1B scenario, so he can play more than he does with Hellebuyck. And he's probably going to be looking for a bit more money because of his really good stats. But imagine with him and Woll, you still wouldn't have a ton of money invested in goaltending. And if you look at all the guys on the market, there's talks that maybe they could trade for Markstrom. Maybe they could trade for UC Saros. If they pull off a Vegas trade for Marner, maybe they can bring back one of their goalies, either Hill or Thompson. And those are good options. Now, Thompson would be a good option too because he got a great contract. But and those guys are all really good, but it's going to eat up a lot more of your cap, and it's going to cost you a much bigger package to get the deal done. Whereas a guy like Brossoit's a UFA, you don't have to give up anything. And the way his stats were, to me, I think that would be a terrific target for them. Another name to watch as well, according to some. This comes from Athletic writers Jonas Seigel and James Myrtle, talking about they wouldn't rule out Dakota Joshua's interest to return to Toronto. Now, I say return because he was a Leafs draft pick. He was a 2014 draft pick, opted to play his full 4 years of U.S. college hockey and become a UFA. Didn't sign in Toronto. But it's not like he refused to play in Toronto. He absolutely didn't want to go there. He saw at the time, the way things were being built in Toronto, wasn't sure that he would be able to find a roster spot and fit in. So it was more about that than it was that he didn't want to be there or had a problem with anything and didn't want to be in Toronto. So the fact now that he's 28 years old and has finally had a couple of full seasons in the NHL, if he was to get the best offer in Toronto, I don't see why he wouldn't return. Now in Joshua, they get a guy like I said, he's 28. you want to be careful here. I said did four full years of college hockey, a little bit of time in the minors for a couple of years, parts of 2 years in St. Louis, and who was the head coach there? Craig Berube. So Berube knows Joshua a bit, so certainly familiarity there. So I guess the input from him would probably be important whether or not they signed him. Then, of course, he's been in Vancouver the past couple of years under Rick Tocchet, for a year and a half or so under Rick Tocchet. Before that was Bruce Boudreau. And in the case of Joshua, he ended up putting up 18 goals and 32 points last year. But it was his first time he really hit that. So, the word is he's probably looking around $3.5 million on a 2-3 year deal. And you have to just be confident that he can duplicate what he did in Vancouver this past year. And that's tough to say. So I think there's going to be some teams that are going to be interested in him to see what he did in the playoffs. He had some good playoff performances, but he also had some playoff games where he wasn't noticeable. It's getting that consistency. And at this point, he's 28 years old, so you wonder, right? But there is reportedly some interest. And if it's a player that you hear that it won't go to Toronto because of where he was drafted and chose not to sign, that is not a worry. It's not the case, not true. Wouldn't put any stock into that at all. If the Leafs make him the best offer and he feels that's where he wants to go, then he would certainly go. A couple other names to watch internally, too, that are going to be free agents is goalie Matt Murray and John Klingberg. According to a recent story in the Toronto Star, there is some interest for them to return. Of course, John Klingberg signed a 1-year deal with the Toronto Maple Leafs, had an epic failure, ended up having hip surgery done for the year. If he can come back, they probably sign him for pretty cheap because he's going to have to prove himself now. Same goes for Matt Murray after all the surgery and recovery time. The only way I think the only way the Leafs entertain it is if he's like the third goalie and he's willing to take like a 1 year, like both of these guys would probably have to take 1 year deals at $1 million or less and not be guaranteed anything. That way, if necessary, you can bury them in the minors and get your full cap relief. But there is interest there. I'd like to know from Leaf fans, if John Klingberg and Matt Murray are willing to sign 1 year deals, cheap money, are you interested in having them back, or should the team just completely move on? So let me know your thoughts on a bunch of the topics we talked about here today. Is Reilly the right guy to trade over Marner, or is Marner still the best trade chip to kind of change the construction of your team and get things, set up differently for more success down the road? Also like with the UFA targets, is Laurent Brossoit, Dakota Joshua names that you'd like to see come to Toronto because they are apparently targets of theirs? And then internally, would you bring back Domi? Would you bring back Bertuzzi? Would you bring back Klingberg and Murray? I mean, we know the team has interest in Domi and Bertuzzi. I know from the article, it suggested that Murray and Klingberg have interest. We don't know how the Leafs feel about it. We haven't really heard anything on their perspective, so I'd like to know what everybody thinks on that front as well. Personally, if I'm Toronto, I'd probably just let them go and keep my distance, but that's just me. Let me know your thoughts on all of the Leafs rumors and trade talk around the team down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. I'll be back a little bit later with some more news and rumors from around the entire league. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.